Welcome, everyone, to tonight's inspiring celebration and conversation with Dr. Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth. We are so excited for you to take part in this dynamic live event where we will be joined by Dr. Lee, her legacy Dione, Leon Ford, and Ryan Tillman. You will receive a more robust introduction of tonight's celebration of guests from our host, Dr. Soaries. But before I turn the reins over, just a quick overview of what you can expect. We encourage you to utilize the chat feature for questions, comments, and general interaction. We love that. Second, you will hear from all of our guests, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. So get those questions ready. Last, I'll come back to share some ways which you can learn even more about tonight's guests and how you can stay connected to the work of Heal America. And now, our moderator for the evening is Heal America co-chair, Dr. DeForest B. Soaries Jr. Dr. Soaries is a highly sought after luminary in financial education, well known for his unwavering commitment to helping individuals and organizations achieve financial freedom. He's the president and CEO of Corporate Community Connections Incorporated. And Dr. Soaries works with corporations to enhance their social responsibility efforts and make positive impacts on the community. With over 30 years of ministry experience as the third senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens, Dr. Soaries has a deep understanding of the importance of spiritual growth, educational excellence, economic empowerment, social justice, and faith-based community development. His groundbreaking work with D-Free Global Foundation Incorporated, where he's also the CEO and founder, was featured in a CNN documentary, catapulting him to a national recognition as a leading figure in the financial education spheres. In addition to serving as former New Jersey Secretary of State, Dr. Soaries has authored 12 books, and his expertise has earned him numerous positions as an independent director. Who better to lead tonight's discussion than Dr. DeForest B. Soaries Jr.?
Thank you, Reverend Sutton. I'll have to send you a check after this broadcast is over. Listen, welcome to Heal America. I want to thank all of you for taking time tonight out of your busy summer schedule on the eve of the 4th of July weekend for coming and connecting with us and exposing yourself to some of the most dynamic people I've ever met. Heal America is a movement that was really founded by my dear friend, the late Bishop Omar Jawar from Dallas, Texas. And Omar believed that the power of love and the power of forgiveness and the power of redemption and the power of empathy could help bridge divides, and people who otherwise would be enemies could become friends. People who otherwise would be adversaries would become allies. And we've accepted Omar's challenge. Well, even as he's transitioned from time to eternity, there are young men and women all across this country who were inspired by him and are now inspired by his legacy. The reality is, Heal America consists of a network of individuals and organizations who refuse to accept the status quo. They refuse to drown in negativity, and they refuse to close their eyes to the possibilities. And so tonight, you're going to hear from two of the most outstanding young people who are leading and speaking for Heal America. But before we introduce them, the key figure tonight that has joined us as our honorary chair, the key figure tonight who in my mind is as significant a personality as anyone I've ever met. I've met Rosa Parks. I worked with Coretta King. I knew Betty Shabazz. I've worked with women who were in government and in the corporate sector. But Dr. Opal Lee from Texas is perhaps the one who has inspired and challenged me the most. And so I'm honored tonight to have the person that we affectionately call the grandmother of Juneteenth. In fact, she calls herself the grandmother of everybody. A woman who's lived in Fort Worth, Texas for 85 years. She's an educator. She's an activist. She's founded Citizens Concerned with Human Dignity. She is the founder of the Juneteenth Museum. She's got a farm where she works with people who need opportunities that otherwise would not have for training and employment. And alongside her granddaughter, who is with us tonight, Dione Sims, she has really led the movement for making Juneteenth a federal holiday. It was Opal Lee sitting next to the President of the United States when on June 17, 2021, President Joseph Biden signed the Juneteenth holiday into law. And since that time, Opal Lee has even been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. You can read about her because she's written a children's book that was recently updated. And so let me introduce to some and present to others Dr. Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth and my hero. Dr. Lee, thank you for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. Shucks. The road to give that introduction.
Now, I didn't tell them how old you were because that's your prerogative to do. But I will say this, people want to know about your life. People want to know about your work. And what I'd like you to do is just give us a sense of where you're from and how you came to the conclusion that you were on this earth to do the kind of work that you do.
Well, I'll start by telling you that I was born in Marshall, Texas. And I'm 96. So I've been here a while. And my parents moved from Marshall to Fort Worth during the Depression. And I'll tell you how hard they worked. And they bought a home. And it wanted in that neighborhood. Paper says there were 500 on the 19th of June, and the police were there. They couldn't stop the mob. Sent us to friends several blocks. They left under cover of darkness. Those people tore that place asunder. They drug out the furniture and did despicable things. But our parents never, ever discussed it with us. And so they worked like Trojans and bought another home. And that's where I was when I finished high school at 16. And my mom was so proud of me. She was going to send me back to Marshall, to Wiley College, school, the great debaters.
Yeah.
But I got married. She was so disappointed. She wouldn't even go to the wedding at our church, Baker Chapel. And it took me 4 years and 4 babies to realize I was going to have to raise that husband too. So I cut my losses and went home to my mother with those 4 babies and had nerve enough to say, I'm ready to go to college now. And she says, I've got no money to send you to nobody's college. But she also said she'd keep my children. And I worked untiringly to get the money to go to Wiley. And guess what I did? I spent it. I bought the children a television so they wouldn't have to, she wouldn't have to run all over the neighborhood looking for them. And I went to Wiley. I was there 3.5 years. I worked in the college bookstore. I'd come home and work on the job I had. My mom kept the job. She worked the job during the week. I'd work at weekends. We got the work done. Nobody complained. And when I finished in 3.5 years and came back to Fort Worth and got a job teaching, I made $2,000 a year. Now I couldn't feed children on no $2,000. So another job. If I taught from 8 to 3, there'd be a car waiting for me. And I'd check in at 4 and work till 12 at Convair. Well, I'm here to tell you that I taught 3rd grade salon, 8-year-olds that I was beginning to act like them. So they gave me another position. I was the visiting teacher. keeping the kids in school, buying shoes, clothes, or whatever. And when I retired, that followed me. People still needed clothes and food. I would take food to people who were bedridden or in wheelchairs, and that place burned. And there was this huge facility behind my house, 33,000 square feet. Now I asked for it, and they let us have it, $4,000 a month. And I nearly had a hemorrhage. Where we going to get any $4,000? But we actually paid it for 11 months. And the month we didn't have it, those people came to us and says, we feel you're doing a good job in the neighborhood. We've heard you're feeding 500 families a day. And they gave us that $1,300,000 facility. I tell you, I was so happy I could have done a holy dance, but the kids say when I try, I'm twerking, so I didn't. Well, I asked for, because people standing in line, I asked who wanted to farm, and 66 of them said they did. And I asked the water district, and they gave us the use of 13 acres of land on the river. Goodness. And so we chose to work with people who'd been incarcerated and couldn't find a job. And Tarleton State College was willing to give accreditation, and the time they'd served would not be time lost, because in Texas, if you've been in prison, you worked on the farm. And so we are trying to help these young people get their lives together. I needed to tell you that I felt like I'd raised 4 children. I'd gone to colleges. I'd taught school. I'd done a food bank. I had the feeling that maybe there was something else I should be doing. I'd met Dr. Myers, Ron Myers, who was a medical doctor and a minister and a jazz musician all rolled into one. And Doc was responsible for some 43 states having some kind of Juneteenth celebration. And I think maybe he's looking down now and says, it's about cotton picking time, you got it done. So, I don't know, we got 1,500,000 signatures with the help of P. Diddy. And we took those to Congress, and we were prepared to get that many more when Dione got the call to go to the White House.
Dr. Lee, I was going to ask you how you got so many signatures, but now I want to ask you, how did you meet P. Diddy?
P. Diddy met me. We might have reached out to him, but I tell you, he helped us a mighty lot.
Isn't that great?
It was. And so we carried those signatures to the White House. No, we gave those to Congress, but we got a call from the White House because the president was signing the bill into law, and we were invited. Do you know we got there in record time? And here I am with the president of the United States and the vice president and all those legislators. Wow. And the president kneeled down and told me something, and everybody wants to know what he said. And I tell them I'm keeping something to myself. I tell them everything.
Right. I heard a rumor. I heard that you walked to Washington from Texas. Is that true, or is that a myth?
Well, it's part myth and part true. I had planned to walk 1,400 miles. I had planned that, But what happened, I started out 2.5 miles, and I'd walk in that fashion from Fort Worth to Arlington, to Grand Prairie, to Dallas, to I walked all over, but somebody had promised us an RV, and they decided what I was doing was too political. And so they kept their RV. But people were so nice to me. I mean, the people in Shreveport took me to Texarkana. The Texarkana people took me to Little Rock. They took me all over. And I was all over these United States.
Wow.
I'm thinking.
It's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable.
Well,
How old were you then?
about 89 or 90. 90. They tell me I was 90. But, hey, I'm 96, but we got that done. You understand?
Yeah. That's just, it's so inspiring. And I'll tell you what I say when I talk about you behind your back. I'm impressed with that. I'm impressed with the 1.5 million signatures. I'm impressed with that caravan from Texas all the way to Washington. But what has really, really challenged me as a pastor and as a person is that your house was destroyed by mean, evil folks on Juneteenth. And instead of using Juneteenth as a time to remind people of your trauma and your pain, you are using Juneteenth, the very day of your greatest pain, as a platform to spread love and to invite people to come together. That is absolutely profound.
I tell young people to make themselves a committee of one, change somebody's mind. We know people who aren't on the same page we are, change their mind. If people can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. And it's up to us to make that change. I do.
That's exactly right. Now, Dione, you've been right by your grandmother's side. I love that so much. You know, Shonda mentioned the books that I've written. I don't think I've ever written a book where I haven't either dedicated to my grandmothers or talked about my grandmothers. And so I'm so honored to meet someone of your generation that sees the value in walking with your grandmother, because after all, she's everybody's grandmother, but she's your real grandmother. So Dione, you're the founder of Unity Unlimited. You produced this annual Juneteenth celebration with your grandmother since 2015. And talk about your calling, your relationship, and how special it is for you to be working with the Grandmother of Juneteenth as your grandmother.
Well, Unity Unlimited was birthed really in 1994 out of seeing young people have a spirit of division in the church. And so they could not worship unless it was their kind of music. When we would go to youth events put by white churches, they couldn't worship the Lord, and I couldn't understand that. And so I developed a program called Teen Choir Explosion that allowed for the young people to learn different cultures, learn different forms of singing, right? So Blacks, whites, Hispanics, they had different clinicians, and they learned. Because I believe it's the exposure to the others that was going to help them when they got older. Now you take yourself 25 years ahead and you see all the division that's permeating our nation right now. And I go, God, you were telling me about this 25 years ago. And so when I birthed Unity Unlimited as a nonprofit to help bring people together, to help unify, I didn't know that he had it in place for me to help my grandmother in 2015 when we needed to bring Juneteenth under my nonprofit. And to know that she felt that Juneteenth was a unifier. And I believe she talks about it being in our DNA, why we do things we do. And the two were just meant to be together. So in 2014, when I saw her, finish the Juneteenth parade at almost 3 miles and run and jump on stage to open it up, And I said, I am such a bad granddaughter. I said, she is 86 at the time. I said, she is working too hard. All she needs to do is come into the new millennium. All right. Get a website, get some social media, and this would be easier. But that's not how a calling is. It's never easy. And when she comes to me at 89 and says that she wants to walk to Washington, D.C., right, to, talk about why Juneteenth hadn't been made a national holiday yet. I asked my dad, I said, y'all know what she's wanting to do, right? And they said, well, you're not going to be able to stop. I said, I just want to make sure I have permission because I'm going to, make her dream come true and help her. I just want to make sure I won't get in trouble. And so we put together the plan. I started the online petitions and everything. And you ask, how did we get 1.5 million? I'll tell you this. We started this petition in 2019, October, and that was right before the pandemic. When George Floyd got murdered in May, we only had 5,000 signatures on that petition, but people wanted to find a way to connect. They wanted to show the support to the African-American community. They wanted to have a voice that meant something. You'll see that a lot of petitions got started at that time, but people found our petition and they just started highlighting it. They saw from 2016 to 2019, her campaign for Juneteenth to be a national holiday. So when people went looking, she was already there. She wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. She wasn't doing it to be seen. It was just something that was already there and people found her, and Lupita, Usher, people found it and they just started sharing it all across their networks because people wanted a voice. They wanted to be heard and support. And because that was what she was already doing, they found that petition. And P. Diddy called us. We did the walk on the 19th and Senator Nina Turner said, Dione, P. Diddy wants to talk to Miss Opal. I said, Puff Daddy? And he called, he reached out for us and he says, I'm gonna help you get that 1 million, because we were just trying to get 1 million then. But by the time we took the petitions to Congress, we had 1.5 million. But I think it's really because she does what she does, not to be seen, not for a pat on the back, but she's a great humanitarian. And her thought was, if people saw her doing it, then they would take notice. And they did.
Well, and that's exactly what we're doing tonight. We're hoping that everyone who has a computer, a phone, and a camera, you can see this great woman who started at 89. She's now 96 years young. And the challenge throughout our conversation will always be, if she can do what she has done, then you can do something too. And that's what she wants us to know. But before we go into what people can do, I think it's very important, Ms. Dione and Ms. Opal, for you to set the record straight and exactly, accurately explain what Juneteenth is, because there's so many theories and so many stories and frankly, so many lies. We want to hear it from the people who are responsible for the holiday.
Well, to tell you what I've learned, that there was this General Gordon Granger with several thousand colored troops, they were called at that time, who ended up in Galveston. And he had what was called General Order Number 3. Those people spread out all over telling folk that the slaves were free. And when the people, the enslaved, came in from their work, he had nailed this to the door of what's now Reedy Chapel, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And somebody read that to them. They started celebrating, and we've been celebrating ever since, you know that?
And I think what's neat for folks to know about Juneteenth as a national holiday, because that's what's important. Juneteenth freed slaves in Texas more than 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, right? But the Emancipation Proclamation really only freed slaves in the rebellious states. It wasn't meant to free everybody.
Right.
So there are still folks that had border states in Kentucky who still had slaves until the ratification of the 13th Amendment. All right. And that wasn't until December. But when we talk about Texas being the last slaves free, when they say that, I cringe because that's not historically accurate. We were not the last slaves freed. And even the slaves in the rebellious states with the ratification of the 13th Amendment weren't the last slaves free. We had to do treaties with the Indians in Oklahoma because our laws did not touch their sovereign lands. And so we did treaties with the 5 tribes in Oklahoma in June 14, 1866 to free those slaves. And so when we think about it, Juneteenth being a representation of supporting freedom and emancipation, no matter when it came, that's what we're celebrating. And like we celebrate Christmas on December 25th, we know that Jesus was not born on December 25th, but it is the date that has been globally selected to represent the birth of a fact, the birth of the Savior, birth of Jesus Christ. And so that's the fact. And we chose a day to celebrate it. That's what Juneteenth is. The fact of freedom exists. We chose the 19th of June to celebrate it. So it's not supposed to say, don't celebrate when freedom came to your state and your country, or you know what I'm saying?
That's right.
Let's do it one day together. And that's the 19th of June.
Yes, symbols point to substance. And when you have a symbol like Juneteenth or the 4th of July that points to the substance of freedom, then it gives the symbol value, even though it is just a symbol. Miss Opal, this is the last thing on my admiration for you. I told you before that the only thing I don't like about you is that at your age, you're able to walk 2.5 miles in 100-degree weather in Fort Worth, Texas. Last week, I had to get a golf cart to catch up with you. You're walking and you got on those sneakers, you had on a long sleeve shirt, and I'm back there dying with my physically fit self. But the significance of the 2.5 years, let's make sure we understand why Opal's Walk for Freedom is a 2.5-mile walk, because I walked about 2.5 blocks last year and then I disappeared. Why 2.5 miles, Ms. Lee?
Because it took 2.5 years after Lincoln declared the Emancipation Proclamation. 2.5 years, those people were still in bondage. And so I want people to be aware of that and do something about it.
Right.
Just my thing is, we need to let people know what happened. And I'm wanting people to be aware that it could happen again if we aren't careful. If we let the wrong person get in office, we're going to be back in that same predicament.
That's exactly right.
You know, the children need to know so that it doesn't happen again when they're grown.
You know, we had 3,500 people sign up for this, and many of them sent us questions that they wanted me to ask you. And as a school teacher, I'm sure you'll love this one, because what one question wanted an answer to is, how can we get the schools to teach children about Juneteenth?
Because we have to vote. We have to vote and get people who understand what we're talking about and what we need. We need to get on the school board. We need to get on the book committee so they don't take the books out of the school. We need to be going to say proactive or something. We don't need to let somebody tell us what we should be doing when we should be doing it ourselves. And we've had this attitude, oh, I'm not getting involved in that. I don't know. But we've got to take things into our own hands and get our young people what they deserve. We've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And I think the youngsters are going to be the ones to get us in the quagmire that we're in. I'm talking about joblessness and homelessness and health care that some of us can get and others can't. And climate change that we are responsible for. If we don't do something about climate change, we're all going to hell in a handbasket.
Miss Dione, I tell you, I know there's a lot of folks jealous of you sitting there next to this great giant, this great queen. And Dr. Lee, I can't thank you enough for your passion, for your integrity, and for your transparency. Dione, what message do you want us to hear as we prepare to go to our other guests? And as you now have this federal holiday, but your work is not over. Where are you going? Where are you and Dr. Lee going? And how can we support you?
You know, one of the things that I want the folks to know is that Juneteenth is a unifier. And she's always said that. And it's really about helping people find themselves in the Juneteenth story. One of the things I love is we're going to be opening the National Juneteenth Museum here in Fort Worth. And the National Juneteenth Museum's main mission is to tell the story of emancipation and freedom from the past to the present to the future, to modern day liberation. And what I really want is for folks to understand that Juneteenth's freedom doesn't rest in just telling that we are free from slavery, because
Right.
we still have to be free in our mind, free in our bodies and our spirits as well. And so when we think about Juneteenth as freedom for everybody, the National Juneteenth Museum will get a chance to tell the stories about the abolitionists, about the Quakers who risked their family and their livelihoods, right, to do what was right. And then we get to talk about the Southern Underground Railroad into Mexico, where, because Mexico abolished slavery in 1824 before the U.S. did, slaves, when they escaped into Mexico, got asylum and did not have to be returned to slave catchers. So when you allow everybody to celebrate the freedom that Juneteenth represents and be able to find themselves in the story, even if your ancestors did own slaves, that's not to say that you are continuing on in that legacy. What we have to do is make Juneteenth about the humanity that it represents, the human nature, the human factor. And that's where changing people's hearts and minds about what freedom represents and how they can help. One of the things I like to say is, I don't want your sympathy. I want your empathy. I want you to be able to see what has held me back in the systemic racism that exists today and do something about it. Do something to change the laws. Do something to address redlining that happened in the 60s and 70s. Do something to undo when you have the power and the authority. And so when we think about that freedom and what it represents, Juneteenth has a whole nother life. It is now revitalized. It's not just something about the past. It becomes our future. And with that, people are now thinking about, how do I vote? How do I make a change? What can I do? And that's where you need to plug in. Be a part of the solution and not be the problem. Don't just talk about it, be about it, right? But
Right.
The one thing we tell people to go vote, but we need good people to vote for. So we need folks to be a part of running for office and not scared that I'm not going to have the money or nobody's going to follow me. Or no, we need good people to vote for so that we can affect the change. So that's what I'm hoping that Juneteenth does, is that it becomes that unifier. When you look at the civil rights movement, when you look at Black Lives Matter movement, you saw everybody. God has always had people working together for what was right. And that's the thing. Juneteenth is doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And that's what I hope that they take away from celebrating Juneteenth annually. It's not just a festival, but it's about a time of reflection for us to think. And that's what I hope that people do, is that every time they do an Opal's Walk, every time we schedule it, that they are thinking, are we free yet? Are we there yet? Is everybody experiencing an equal quality of life? DEI, it's about the equity part for me and making sure that we are all experiencing God's best.
Yeah, I want to thank God that He allowed you, Opal Lee, to live long enough to see your work turn into reality. A lot of times people have to die and wait until after they're dead to see the fruits of their labor. And I know there are many more projects you're working on, but I can't imagine the joy you must feel knowing that your labor has not been in vain. Dione, thank you for your leadership, your inspiration. Juneteenth is a day for inspiration, information, and cooperation. It's not just a Black day, and Opal Lee has said that over and over and over again. And I think your being the co-chair, the honorary chair, rather, of Heal America is the proper personal symbol that we need, because your work speaks for who you are. You're not just a philosopher, but you're an activist, and we thank God for you. Listen, when talk about humanity, we have two young humans whose lives and whose stories are absolutely stunning. They're not Opal Lee, but if they live long enough, their legacies will be just as impactful. The first young man is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He is another one of my heroes, Leon Ford. He's got a wonderful book, but more important than his book, he's got a wonderful story and testimony. Leon, tell folks why I admire you so much and what you're doing with your life.
Thank you, Dr. Soaries, and thank you, Dione and Dr. Opal Lee. I'm so inspired, and there's so many similarities between our stories, and I draw so much strength from you and the work you have done. When I was 19 years old, I was shot 5 times by a Pittsburgh police officer, and one of those bullets paralyzed me. I was also facing up to 20 years in prison after mistakenly being shot. I leveraged that moment to become a committed one, like Dr. Opal Lee said, because in life, sometimes we're faced with adversity and we have a choice to either give up, become consumed by the hatred and negativity, or make a conscious decision to do something about it. And I made a conscious decision to do something about it. I began to advocate for many different people and families who were victims of police violence around the country. And then I began to lean in to build relationships with law enforcement. I realized that I could, stay on social media and have an adversarial relationship with police officers, or I could understand policing and, build relationships with those police officers, help them build, healthier relationships with community as we work together for, making our communities safer. Last year, I actually founded a foundation called the HERE Foundation. And the former chief of police in Pittsburgh is actually my co-founder. And we have many differences. However, we were able to lean in on our similarities, things that we agreed on, which became the 3 pillars for our foundation, which is mental health, workforce development, and gun violence reduction.
So Leon, let me make this clear. What you're saying is that you were shot mistakenly in your back by a Pittsburgh police officer. And
yes.
Then you formed a partnership with the Pittsburgh, that same police department, to work to build bridges and to create healing between the police that shot you and the community that rallied around you.
Absolutely.
That is a phenomenal display of courage, of kindness, of redemption. And it takes superhuman, supernatural power to do that, because that's not natural. What's natural is to be mad and to just go off. And I just want to honor you for that. In your book, do you tell your story?
Absolutely. I share the many different experiences that led up to that moment and after, and how, I embraced this journey of forgiveness and what led me to not only founding the HERE Foundation, but also meeting the officer who shot me.
Wow. Folks, next month, in the month of July, we're going to have an entire evening with Leon Ford and really talk about his book, talk about some of the stories he tells, talk about the writing of the book and how it impacted him mentally and emotionally. And we're going to talk about things people can do. But Leon, tonight, KP sent us a question for you. his basic question is, how can one person make a difference, especially if you're looking for political support, but you live in, say, a congressional district or a part of town that's so controlled by one political party that they really just take you for granted. So how do you deal with that?
Absolutely. To reiterate what Dr. Opal Lee said, make yourself a committed one. And it sounds like KP has, in fact, made himself or herself a committed one. And then finding allies, finding, like-minded people who, may think like you, who may have or share a similar heart and passion as you do. And then the other big thing, which is really, really hard, right, is convincing, right, and collaborating with some of those individuals who may think differently than you. I know that for some people that might sound very outlandish, but it's possible. And from my experience working with people who think differently than me, sharing my perspective in a very clear and straightforward way that's full of love, but also there's a certain level of intentionality that goes into working with people who may think differently than you. But I think it's important, especially when we're creating movements, but we're also seeking results.
Yeah, folks, listen, Leon Ford is anything but a victim. And again, a lot of folks who had his experience and who now move around in a wheelchair would consider themselves victims. But I've seen Leon run through an airport with the wheelchair. I was on a plane trying to go to sleep one time. He hit me with his elbow from his wheelchair. We were at the walk with Miss Opal last week, and Leon was keeping up with Miss Opal in the wheelchair better than I was on my feet. But Leon, listen, I can't tell you how much respect I have for you. I love the fact that you travel around the country speaking to groups, and not just selling books, but speaking to groups, motivating people, challenging them to do the kind of work that Opal Lee does, that Dione does, that you do. And I want to ask Ryan just 2 or 3 questions quickly so that we have time before we close for some live questions from our large audience tonight. Ryan Tillman is a police officer. When I was coming up, we called the police the cops, the fuzz. Young people started calling them 5-0. We got all kinds of nicknames, at least in our community, for police. And during this not just post George Floyd, but post Rodney King. You see, Rodney King was the first national incident caught by a cell phone or by a camera that caused us to really understand the gravity of the problem that Dr. King talked about in the 60s. Dr. King talked about police brutality even at the March on Washington. But this young man became a police officer during this time when basically our communities either hated the police, feared the police, or both. Formed an organization called Breaking Barriers. And now Ryan Tillman, as CEO of Breaking Barriers, he's still a part-time police officer, but he travels around the country helping police departments understand different approaches to policing than some of us have experienced, understanding our perspective from the community so that they can better interact with the community. And then he spends a lot of time in schools teaching young people how to interact with the police. Ryan, from California, I know your son is sick. We're praying for him. And I appreciate you spending this time with us tonight as we launch this Heal America series. Thanks for being with us. Tell us your story. How did you become a police officer at a time when you knew folks in your family and your community just had felt some kind of way about the police?
Hey, first and foremost, thank you, Dr. Soaries, man, for having me. It's a true honor. And Dr. Opal Lee and Dione, it's a pleasure to be on with you. And obviously my brother from another mother, Leon. We have really, blood couldn't make us any closer. So I love all of you guys. My story is very, very interesting, and it's so crazy to kind of just listen to everybody on this fireside chat, because a lot of us are so similar in different ways. I'm from Southern California, like Dr. Soaries said, and growing up, I was an athlete, played football in college, had two really, really good parents. And once I got out of college, my goal was to go out there and start a business. Like I always wanted to go and be a businessman, entrepreneur. And my wife got pregnant after we got married. After our first year, she got pregnant, and at the time I was working at Abercrombie and Fitch, which was one of the worst jobs ever. And I remember my wife looking at me like, bro, you need to go get you a job, because that little part-time money you making over there ain't gonna cut it with this baby on the way. So I remember praying about it and asking God what he wanted me to do with my life. And I remember, one of the things that he put in front of me was law enforcement. And at the time, when that was put in front of me by my dad's best friend, who was a captain of a police department, I was like, man, I'm not working for the man. I'm not about to be a pig. I'm not about to be the popo 5-0. That wasn't going to be me. But it's funny what happens when you open yourself up to the Lord and what the Lord wants to do for your life. And so when I prayed about it, God took me to this door, and I said, God, if this is what you want me to do, open the door. If not, close it. And after praying that, the doors just flew open, and I found myself going into something that I despise the most. And I say I despise the most simply because growing up, I wasn't a fan of officers. I couldn't stand them. I had some bad experiences with them. My family members had bad experiences with them, saw bad things on TV. And so those are all things that led me not to liking police officers. I used to always say that police officers became officers because they were the ones that got picked on in high school. So they became officers so they could pick on everybody else. That was my mentality. And so now finding myself as a police officer, it was very, very interesting, because now I'm the man. And it was at a time that Michael Brown was actually killed in Ferguson. So that was a time when the nation started going up in, in chaos again. And I'll never forget the feeling I had, because I was like, man, like, I feel like people hate me, like, and they don't even know who I am. And I remember talking to my mother about that whole situation. And she said, you know what, after thinking about it and praying about it, I'm sure that, you probably would have done the same thing if you were that officer, but I know it's because you wanted to come home to your family, your wife, and your kids at the end of the day. And that actually opened my mind to a completely different perspective. It allowed, the only reason my mom saw it that from that perspective is because she saw the pumpkin that was involved in that situation. I say the pumpkin because my mom calls me Pumpkin. And so I said, man, I need to go out there and change the perception of everybody else in the community, so that way they understand how we do. But I also have to notify and educate officers on why there's this tension revolving law enforcement in the community. So I set out on a mission in 2014 to go out there and bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community, and to change the face of modern day policing. And one of the things I found interesting about this fireside chat tonight is Dione mentioned earlier that when you guys wanted to start, advocating for Juneteenth, it wasn't when George Floyd got killed. You guys had already been doing the work long before the George Floyd movement. So it wasn't just a fly by night type of thing. It wasn't like just a harsh reaction, or not a harsh, but a reaction towards the situation. And that's kind of very similar. When George Floyd was killed, my phone started ringing off the hook, but I had already been doing this work for 4 or 5 years. And so people had already knew they needed someplace to go to get answers as to why they witnessed what they witnessed in the killing of George Floyd. And that's and ever since I started this organization in 2014, my mission has been simple. I need to go out there and change the face by leading with love, leading with empathy, and leading with respect. And so I feel that we can continue to all grow forward together if we just learn how to love each other. God tells us to love your brother as you would love yourself. That's a fundamental principle that we all should be doing. We also, like Dione says, don't sympathize when we empathize. And what empathy needs to do, empathy, all the only requirement for empathy is that you can understand how to feel. I always say empathy doesn't have to understand, it just has to feel. And if you can feel the same emotions that I feel, whether it be sad, whether it be a hurt, whether it be anger, and start to understand why I feel that way. So lead with empathy. And the last one is leading with respect. And if you learn how to respect your brother, if you learn how to respect your sister, by doing those 3 things, we all be able to move forward together in this journey to try to find unity and bridge that gap.
Well, what I love also about Opal Lee is when she always says, if people can be taught to hate, people can be taught to love. And you're teaching people. People don't just grow into either love or hate. They've got to be taught. And through your work, Leon, through your work, Ryan, you are literally teaching people, especially as a member of the law enforcement community. Ryan, we got a question for you from someone who had planned to be here tonight also. And the question is kind of long. She or he needs suggestions on how to reach people in their community. What activities can they do to enhance us? And they end by saying they're thirsty to know. And listen, people around this country, they want solutions. And that's why I'm happy to be here tonight, because folks, none of these people, Opal Lee, Dione, Ryan, Leon, they don't have their heads in the sand. They recognize that America still has challenges. They recognize that there's work to do. You've got three choices. One, you can ignore it and just go for yourself. The second, you can just stay mad because the problems exist. Or the third option, which they've taken, is do something about it. Be the change that you want to see. So Ryan, answer that question. What can people do? What 2 or 3 concrete examples of things people can do? And by the way, folks, whatever he says, we're going to help you. Heal America is here to give you the resources and the tools and the exposure to do whatever it is he's about to say you can do.
Mm-hmm. So in order to answer that question, I'm going to share a quick story in order to set the foundation for what you can do. About 1.5 years ago, I started to do jiu-jitsu. Now, if you're not familiar with jiu-jitsu, it's a form of defensive tactics, martial arts, whatever it is that you would like to call it. And I started to do jiu-jitsu simply because, and I don't know why my lights went out, but don't disregard that. But I started to do jiu-jitsu because I wanted to stay safer on the streets. And so, I like to pride myself on being an athlete, and I've done a lot of, I've done a lot of different sports throughout my life. And so when I started jiu-jitsu, I was like, oh, this should be a cake. It should be a walk in the park. And so I remember the first day I walked into the gym and I got on the mat and I was rolling around with this 16-year-old high school student. Now, mind you, at the time I was about 34 years old. So I'm rolling down around on this mat, and I'm pretty strong at the time. So the natural person will like, oh man, you should be able to kill this 16-year-old on the mat. Well, next thing I know, about 30 seconds later, that 16-year-old had me wrapped up like an anaconda, and I felt so terrible about myself. And I was like, I'm so glad my wife is not here to witness this, because this is what she has for a husband. That 16-year-old had my face pinned on the mat and everything. And so I was like, okay, that's a fluke. So I did it again, roll with him again. Same thing. 20 seconds later, he had me hemmed up. This happened over and over and over again. And so at that moment in time, when I finished that first jiu-jitsu gym, I had 2 choices I could make. Either one, I could say I'm not coming back and getting embarrassed like that. Or 2, I could say, you know what, I'm going to keep coming back. I'll keep putting myself in this uncomfortable position. And then over time, I'll start to learn and get educated. And the next thing I know, I'm going to start hemming this 16-year-old up and letting him know who's boss. Well, I made the choice to do number 2, and I kept coming back to the gym. And over time, what I started to see is it got easier. And it wasn't that jiu-jitsu got easier. What got easier was the simple fact that I learned how to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So to help answer that question that you have, the first thing that you need to do is you have to put yourself in uncomfortable positions. You have to go out there and meet people that don't look like you, that don't talk like you, that don't sound like you, that may think differently than you do. And by doing that, what you're going to do is you're going to start to be exposed to something that you weren't even aware of. And once you get that understanding, this is exactly what Leon did. Leon went and immersed himself into the law enforcement profession, and that allowed him to understand it more. It didn't necessarily justify the act that occurred against him, but it allowed him to go out there and stimulate and create effective change because he knew where the change needed to come from. Dr. Opal Lee, Dione, Leon, myself, we've all put ourselves in these uncomfortable positions so that way we can understand where the change needs to come from. And then once you understand, developing a plan is easy. This is the easy part, because now I know what needs to get fixed. And so I guess the greatest advice I can give to you, or that person to ask that question, is go into your community and start to meet people that you wouldn't necessarily go out there and meet on your normal basis. Form and develop relationships and bonds with them. And then when you do that, you guys can put together and develop a plan together.
All right. Now, see, what I don't like about you, Ryan, is you're a police officer, but you've got this voice. You sound like you should be on some big radio or TV station. Then it just sounds so professional. All right, now, fellas, we have 5 minutes. I'm going to let Opal Lee have the last word because that's the right thing to do. So I'm going to ask both of you in one sentence, what is the most important thing you've learned from Opal Lee? If you go past one sentence, I'm going to cut you off. One sentence.
Go ahead, Leon.
Leon, the most important thing you've learned from Opal Lee.
The most important thing I've learned from Dr. Opal Lee is how to love on people and treat people like family despite their dysfunction.
All right, I like that. You hear that, Dr. Lee? What about you?
I do.
5-0.
5-0. So the one thing I learned from Dr. Lee is very, very simple. It doesn't matter where you start, it's where you finish.
Oh,
All right. Now, Dr. Lee, we've got 2 minutes left. I want you to tell us, how does it feel to know that you are influencing young men like Leon Ford and Ryan Tillman and even Dione, your granddaughter? How does it feel to know that there's an entire movement, network of young people around this country who are accepting your message and embracing your leadership?
It feels like I should continue to get to some more young people and help them out too. And that take these young folk along with me because they got a plan and a message to get to the others. We could be a team, fellas.
Well,
That
we are a
venture.
team. Heal America is building this network. We're going to stay in touch with people. Reverend Sutton is going to explain what steps you can take tonight to stay connected with not just these super leaders, these 4 young leaders, but also to stay in touch with each other. We've got tools, we've got training events, we've got ambassadors. We'll be having any number of events. There are programs around this country that are making such a difference that we plan to amplify their work and distribute the information for free to make sure if you want to learn how to help, and there are people who know how to help, we're going to connect the people who want to do it with the people who are doing it so that we can truly make the impact that Opal Lee has called us to make. Listen, thank you. I'm honored. I'm honored to talk to all of you, even though all of you have something I wish I had, but I'm honored to be in your presence. I'm honored to be around people who are committed to causes bigger than themselves. And I thank God for this privilege he's given me to work in this great network called Heal America. Reverend Sutton?
Wow, what a great night. This has been incredible. Thank you, Dr. Soaries, for leading such a transformative conversation. Now, here's where you can take part. Join the Heal America movement tonight by taking a personal pledge to help heal America. There's a QR code that's going to be on your screen, which will connect you to our work. You can learn more about taking a moment by taking a moment right now and scanning that code. And you can have early access to Heal America workshops, trainings, masterclasses, and an opportunity to connect with tonight's guests. They'll be sharing in monthly fireside chats featuring their books, the amazing work they're doing, and ways that you can get involved. Dr. Opal Lee, if you would like to learn more about Juneteenth and share the life's work of Dr. Opal Lee with future generations, you can find that in her book, Juneteenth, A Children's Story. It's written by Dr. Lee, and you can use the QR code that's being displayed. Also available is A Redemptive Path Forward. A Redemptive Path Forward is the literary work of Heal America co-chair Anton Lucky. It has been a life-changing experience for those of us who believe in redemption, and it'll certainly be a blessing to you. The fascinating story of Leon Ford and how he has triumphed, he's moved from triumph to tragedy, through tragedy, can be found in his book, An Unspeakable Hope. You can find that QR code on the screen as well, if you'd like to purchase.
I don't see a QR code. Where is it?
It should be coming
Talk
up.
about this QR code. I don't see a QR code. Is it on my screen too?
It should be.
Leon, do you see a QR code?
We're going to be sharing it. The audience sees it.
All right, good. As long as they see it.
Okay. Also, we also want to highlight Mrs. Rosetta Jefferson's book, Mama's Baby Boy. It's about the life and times of Bishop Omar Malidawa Jawar I. It shares inspiration about her beloved son, Heal America's visionary and founder, Bishop Omar Jawar. If you're interested in ways to bring police and community together, Ryan Tillman's book, Happy Eyes, Becoming All Things to All People, is sure to be a bestseller, but you can't grab that one until this weekend. But you can go to his website, breakingbarriersunited.com, for more information, or you can scan the QR code being displayed. So once again, we thank you for your attendance and your participation this evening. We had so many incredible questions in the chat. We weren't able to address them all during our limited time together. However, we will be sure to respond to them in future correspondences, so stay tuned. For those of you who haven't already done so, here's one more chance to take the pledge and join the movement. So together we can heal America. Good night, everyone.
God bless you.